Hello and welcome back. In today's episode, I'll be joined by good friend and former work partner, Asive Nohashe, as we look back and reflect on the project we completed together in our second year of our undergraduate degree, where we proposed an urban design framework for Asive's childhood neighbourhood of Quigney in East London. Using this project, we will discuss the value of ethnographic knowledge in creating responsive, representative, and people-oriented spaces with reference to our own experience and contemporary literature. When we were doing this design intervention, we focused on your hometown neighbourhood of Quigney in East London. And so could you just give our viewers a brief description of what this area is like, so that we can visualize it?
So Quigney, I remember like 2 years back, we used to have conversations about it, telling each other about it. So Quigney, right? It's located in the Eastern Cape, South Africa. Just to give you an overall description of what Quigney is about, it's basically a neighborhood, actually, to be specific, that is on the coast of East London, and it is specifically close to Eastern Beach. This is where most festival happens. For example, the Matepo Foundation, they host events where they bring local artists like Casper, Ricky Rick, only to name a few. And this helps bring people from various parts of the Eastern Cape actually to come towards that space. There's also notable spaces such as Ibuhlanti. So it's basically the main hub of social activity in the Eastern Cape. And one thing I really like about it, it is a very great space for social integration and for the integration of various people from different races. Because we often find a lot of people such as Abelusi and people from Lesotho moving towards that space, right? Because it is firstly, it is an urban decay space, so people already have backyard dwellings where they can rent out to anyone who just moved into East London, right? So the community-based neighborhood where there's like where you find bus stations and there's like various aspects that make that whole neighborhood as a whole. Naming again, Ebuhlanti, that's the main creative hub or the main social integration space. It is at the urban periphery, so it's currently undergoing a lot of urban decay. So it's basically not like at night, it becomes a ghost town because of the lack of like attributes that make the space livable at night or safe, like a safe environment. So obviously there's going to be like high crime rates, but it's just like a very different space compared to Johannesburg. As soon as I landed here, I'm like, where on earth am I? I'm from rural spaces where all you see is you see mountains, you see greenery, and now you see the concrete jungle. So it's a whole different space. You're like, okay, what am I getting myself into? Because this is not what I signed up for.
I can imagine it's a bit of a shock. And then, I mean, we also spoke about ethnographic knowledge and how, when we're talking about ethnographic knowledge, we're interested in culture. We're interested in how people are living and how, people from different cultures are living, what their, how their customs and traditions play out in the urban environment or in the built form. And so do you think that this focus on culture and everyday life is something that we as planners, as urban designers, should actually pay more attention to?
Yes, most definitely. I do think that ethnographic research, to be particular, because when we look at our projects from the first projects, because we had two parts to our project, we literally looked at it from personal stances, where we drove this journey from me moving to Johannesburg and then meeting you and you introducing me into the space in which you live in, and just generalizing it, right? Ethnographic research is very important because we as planners, right, we plan with the people and not for them, because that would then result in various spaces that are developed and look beautiful, but definitely do not respond to the spaces or do not respond to the people that live there. So it's like going to Alex, right? Here in Johannesburg, and then putting a smart city. People don't have already, they don't have enough skills to literally run through there. It's going to be an alienating space because everything within that smart city will be technocentric. It requires you to have high levels of skills. So bringing it back with like culture and how people live in like communities with ethnographic research, it has the potential to inform planning organizations about urban dwellers' daily lives, right? And practices. Then you'll be able to find, like, for example, like develop a UDF, or develop a space that could potentially respond to urban, like to the people that live there. And Ian Bentley touches this on a lot, when he looks at responsive urban spaces. And when you contextualize that in a South African context, it's very important because, I mean, like, once volunteered at children's homes, right? And it's something that I'm very like passionate about currently, especially going into urban planning. And these children, I was teaching them this one day, and then this girl was like to me, um, I don't want to be anything. I just want to stay within this environment because look at where we are. We are within like shambles. My parents are here, and my parents' parents have lived here. So for me, I'm not gonna move anywhere, and there's no spaces for me to even exercise anything that I like within that space. And that's when it hit me that the environment in which people live in greatly affects how they perceive themselves in society and how they perceive themselves moving forward. So ethnographic research and just understanding the daily movements of people plays a very crucial role, especially when it comes to
Definitely.
addressing the needs of different groups. Because you do find that in certain spaces, it's mostly color dominated, whereas, like for example, in Quigney or like in Alex, it's like a wide range of people. There's foreign nationals, there's people from different cultural backgrounds. Like there's Bedis, there's Xhosas, there's Zulus. So finding a space that would basically cater for all the needs of all the different cultural groups that live within that space. That's very important.
Yeah, and it also just all feeds back into our purpose as planners, or one of our main objectives is to make places that are inclusionary. And by
Yes.
inclusionary, it's not just like things like economic inclusion and social
Yeah.
inclusion to some extent, but and racial inclusion. But I think cultural inclusion isn't necessarily always focused on, or like, I haven't really come across a great attention towards cultural inclusion and what that would mean, and how we can
Inclusion.
create it. And I think it's also just because culture is so diverse, and maybe as planners we don't want to go into like the nitty-gritty
Into that space.
nuances, and it's
Yeah.
easier to plan for economic statuses and economic
Mm.
classes because that's
True.
a bit more straightforward, whereas yeah,
True.
culture gets a bit
A
layered.
bit.
And yeah,
True. But I feel like I'm just adding on to what she said. The voices of people, they really matter, because then that will
definitely.
help you, especially as a planner, to unleash or to unravel local methods that you've never really thought about, or local ways of thinking.
Yeah, and I mean that is like ethnographic knowledge. Yeah, going back to when we look at like apartheid spatial planning, obviously it was
Yeah.
very deliberate and it was very
True.
successful in isolating and removing
Mm.
the Black majority um, and to peripheral areas. And to this day, we are seeing that legacy, which is very difficult to reshape and redress. And so when we were doing our project, we spoke about obviously the space being majority
Yeah.
low to like working class community, and how when
Yes.
we were kind of approaching this, we were looking at, I guess, we were looking at theories and theorists and how
Yes.
we can look at this without just being very surface level. And so we looked at Barbara Southworth's work on
Mm.
dignified spaces and how basically the importance of dignifying spaces as a form of spatial redress and as also a form of you know forming identity and supporting identity and establishing this greater sense of belonging, which was something we thought was really critical and really lacking in Quigney. Yeah,
Yeah.
as part of our design intervention, then we proposed that dignity could be supported and possibly even strengthened by cultural identity and heritage appreciation in Quigney. In order to do this, we inadvertently took an ethnographic approach. I don't think we knew it at that time. And we were like, let's use
There. Yeah.
Asive as our source of information and knowledge.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then our aim was
Yeah.
to reestablish dignity in Quigney and to make
See as a whole.
Quigney
Yeah.
exactly, and to make it a space that prides itself in its cultural heritage, in its traditions, in its, its history, and to look at how culture can be celebrated and can be supported and informed in the urban form, and how culture can actually be this almost like bridge between people and space, and how
Yes.
that cultural relationship can really make people feel like they belong and they are
Work together.
represented in the space.
Yeah.
And so, can you
Mm.
briefly explain why you feel culture in the case of Quigney is so important as a young planner? I mean, we did touch on this a bit, but also like, what can culture do for this aim of strengthening or reestablishing dignity and a sense of belonging?
Like culture as a whole, that's your identity.
Yeah.
Even when in a certain culture, you grow up into these practices that are practiced every day. And when you go out into the world, for example, in my case, I went out to Johannesburg and I'm like, this is a culture shock. Everything that was done there was just, yeah, it was different.
Different.
And culture, yeah, it helps you become rooted. So the importance of culture, right, is extremely important, especially in the context of Quigney, because you literally, like I had said before, you're building for the people and not like not with the people and not for them. And when you look at it, we looked at elderly people and how they perceived like culture as the whole and how much they value it so much. So the incorporation of culture into a space, it helps people like appreciate the space more, want to go there more, because we have like holidays like Heritage Day.
Yeah.
You find across South Africa people are celebrating different aspects of their culture and they are posting it so proudly. So with space, right? Imagine having a space where, for example, you see coastal colors everywhere, where you see aspects of urban design that incorporate various aspects of your culture. So, for example, with the closer culture, we like storytelling, or we like just listening to elders just speak about like the folklore and sitting in a bonfire type
Mm.
of vibes where you're just listening to each other tell these stories and you're like, did that really happen? And it's so believable. So culture is a very important aspect when it comes to that. And in like in with East London in general, one of the people in which we interviewed, I remember in our project 2 years ago, yeah, they were like East London in general could do with more closer heritage, right? Outside the fact that everybody
Mm.
speaks is closer Imonti, in which they call it that. So yeah, having the closer culture incorporated into a space, it helps make that space so significant, and it gives it that
Yeah.
edge in terms of how the space is
I
built.
like what you said about that, like making the place your own or making it,
Yeah.
different and unique and
Hmm.
everything. Because I think that's
Yeah.
also historically, I mean, people of color, especially Black communities,
Yeah.
weren't given that, it's not even a privilege, but
Platform.
they weren't given the right to personalize their space or decide what their space would look like and what purpose it would serve. It was purely
Mm.
to live. That was it. There was no thought about like the different aspects of just everyday life. And so I think that really in
True.
the post-apartheid democratic era, as planners, like this idea of personalizing or making the space your own is something that's important because it was something that people were stripped of. They weren't allowed to do that. And so enabling or giving
Yeah.
people the chance to make their space firstly their space, feel like it is representing them,
Mm.
feel like it is, this is my, it represents my family, represents my neighborhood, whatever, is important because it is also, again, with that idea of belonging, because it's making a space unique. It's giving it that, like you said, the extra edge. And so definitely, I think that
Yeah.
that's something very critical to think about and also to, I guess, challenge in urban design when we're looking at urban design. I mean, like we just go on Pinterest and we go on all these
Yeah.
very westernized platforms and the information that we're getting fed is very rarely
somewhat
reflecting,
true.
like
Like
the global
the
south or
African, yeah,
Africa or South
yes,
Africa. And so I
yes,
think it's also like this need to kind of be like, we're always talking about we need to
contextualize.
exactly context
Mm.
specific, we need to decolonize our
Yeah,
mindset and
contextualize.
everything. And I think that's a
Mm.
big phrase, like
Broad
decolonizing
context.
education,
Yeah,
decolonizing knowledge.
this is broad
But I
context.
think, yeah, we
Mm.
can break it down and be like, let's decolonize the way we are designing, like in urban design.
True.
Why are our buildings
Yeah,
shaped the way they are? Does it have to do with,
like that.
you know, efficiency? Does it have to do with uh
Mm.
the look? Like how can we
Yeah.
look back at traditional ways of building? Was it more sustainable? Was it more cost effective? You know?
Because also, sis, if you look at it, I saw this other picture. It was actually a meme um, on yeah, I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw this meme, and it was showing like a picture of these people, like the Greek, like people from Greece, right? And then they were building this road, and they had so many layers of different material, and those roads lasted for years or even decades upon decades. And then they made reference to South Africa, and then they just looked at the road. It had potholes. They like engineers literally have these potholes, and then you look at the old traditional methods, and you see there's the shifts on how things are. So that whole incorporation of what you said of bringing it back to planning, of looking at local traditional methods that used to then and somewhat faded due to the modernization of the space, and how we
Mm,
can both incorporate those two into one space. Yeah, so that's
exactly.
very very important. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
also just generally speaking, this it just brings it back to the whole thing of just generally, right? When you find, like, I know for me, when you get to raise, right, you get to an empty room that has no character, it has no color whatsoever,
Mm,
and you somewhat over time turn that whole space into something that you like, that feels
yeah.
like home, because that's your safe space. So the whole idea of personalization and culture, those are very much interrelated,
Mm,
and they are, like, if not, they work perfectly together, because it's like once a space is so personalized to something that you know, or something that feels like you're away, like you're home away from like yourself, I don't have to worry about various aspects of that space.
yeah, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's so true though. So then like my other question relating to that, I guess maybe we're just the only youth or only people in our generation that actually care about culture. Do you think that like, when we
Yeah.
were speaking to people in from Quigney when we were doing our project, do you feel like culture is something that the youth are interested in and just maybe don't have a lot of knowledge on?
Yeah, so I feel like this with culture, um, knowing from, like, let's start with Bromfontein, just generalizing it.
Hmm.
A lot of people like incorporating. Let's look at clothes. So a lot of people like personalizing their clothes, and you see like strips of like black and white with the corset thingies, or like the Ndebele ones where they use blankets
Mm.
or turn it into mini jackets. So it's like I feel like the youth is really interested in culture, and knowing personally, it's like you want to go back to what you know, your roots, but then
Mm.
also modernizing it into this whole thing of this new utopia, because you're trying to create a new movement of fashion.
Yeah.
And there's also closer brand where they specifically look at closer clothing, and they
Mm.
modernize the fabrics, like the textures and how those interrelate. But also, going back to our project, what we also did, and I, for me personally, after speaking to various people from there, I was like, I feel like I'm closer light because I didn't really understand the symbols of various colors. I was like, oh,
Mm.
this works well together and this works well together. But I feel like I wanted to know more. I was actually sitting in
I
person in
wanted
front
to
of my
know more too. I was
listening
like,
to my
this is very
grandmother.
interesting.
This is very interesting because it's like you get so caught up with the whole like modernized stuff that you forget to like look at your roots and say, actually, this is
Yeah.
how we how it works. And I mean, like with us, we looked at the symbolism of colors in the closer culture,
Yeah.
right? To help inform our UDF, or to help inform like what we were looking at. And where we found, like we spoke to like my grandmother Nolisi,
Mm.
um she told us various colors. For example, with white, which is one of the greatest colors in the closer culture, one of the most significant ones. So it basically represented like peace, meditation, and purity, right? Obviously, it is like it is there, but I didn't understand the extent of that, like how important it is. And I've been seeing lately, it's like when it comes to knowledge, one of my friends was actually posting about this over the Easter holidays, and she was reading like a closer book, and she was like, I didn't understand the extent of how I've gotten so lost with speaking English, for example, that I
Yeah.
can't even read my own language. I don't know. Like she was sitting like next to her grandmother and asking her what every word meant. She's like,
Sure.
and when she was reading it, she's like, "Oh my goodness, I don't know." But there's this high interest that we have as a youth, like this forms part of my
Yeah.
identity, and I want to and like unravel it and see how it works
Exactly.
as a whole. So I think that's very important, sis.
Definitely.
Like the incorporation of culture and understanding it, and the youth, there's a high interest. It's just that they need a platform for them
Yeah,
to learn such
definitely.
stuff. Yes,
And maybe the
definitely.
urban realm through design, responsive design and stuff, maybe that can be the starting platform where this cultural
What?
interchange and
Hmm.
knowledge can actually be facilitated. And then, you know, going
Yeah.
off on that point is, can you just, tell our audience a little bit about how we went about, incorporating a more ethnographic understanding and ethnographic approach when we reimagined the design space for
Yeah.
Quigney?
We did mention the colors. So we looked at various colors and how they like symbolize various aspects of it, and the culture and the creation of like social spaces. So one of the greatest things that we implemented or we looked at was the introduction of an amphitheater, because there is an open space, right, just next to the beach branch, right, where um it's just open land. It's like unutilized land. So we saw the opportunity of introducing this space where it has a lot of like, also at the back it supports local businesses where there's like mini stalls where people can sell traditional food. And it's just as a reminder, home cooked food, especially traditional food, it always hits differently. So we introduced the amphitheater where various people can even tell stories about it.
Yeah.
And along the beachfront we also incorporated the whole idea of like using the colors, right, to then you make various patterns across the street on the beachfront, which is similar to what we looked at when we looked at the Sea Point Promenade,
Yeah.
especially in Durban, and how they use the various like Zulu colors and their symbolism to basically make, firstly, that beachfront aesthetically pleasing, but to also
Mhm.
incorporate that whole aspect of culture. And that's one of my favorite things, because I was like, I actually never thought about the incorporation of these colors
And it's
into
like,
like
it feels like something so basic. Like,
yeah.
it's not like, whoa, like we could have never thought about it. It seems like something quite simple.
Yeah, and also like sis, one thing I like about it is like it allows you to unlock your inner creativity, because you are the new generation of this culture and the new generation of urban planning. And when you use ethnographic research or ethnographic knowledge of this space to actually because when we were designing this project, we didn't even know what ethnographic
No, we
research
didn't.
was. And we were like, let's go back to something that we know and even find out from the people that are there. And I felt like we had more connection to this project
Definitely.
when we were doing it. So the power of just using those colors, it unlocks your creativity first of all. It allows you to see things from a different light, and also allows you to create social hubs that are going to respond to the youth. Then going back to the whole thing of creating a platform for them to learn more about their culture. From my experience in the whole like project, I felt like I knew my neighborhood better. I even had a greater connection, but also it helped me have the drive to continue this whole idea of just wanting to make a change, but a profound change that was not going to benefit just us as urban planners or makers, like credible planners or urban designers, but will then help people appreciate their space more. And like we said, our topic was finding like dignity within urban spaces, and it will help re-dignify that whole space.
Well, thank you so much, Asive. Thank you for joining us today on this episode, and thank you for your insight and for the discussion and for really giving our viewers a lot to think about and maybe to reflect on.
Thank you so much for having me and even inviting me. It's quite an exciting thing to talk about, especially when you've been so involved in it.